Okay, nobody did the thumbs down. Hallelujah, we're progressing. So in talanoa, when we refer to women and girls, right, we refer to them in all their diverse identities, including as lesbians, bisexuals, trans people, intersex people, fa'afafine, Leti, and other non-heteronormative Pacific identities, Francophone women, diaspora women, indigenous women, women living in occupied and colonized territories, migrant women and girls, women with disabilities, including psychosocial and intellectual disabilities, sex workers, those living with HIV/AIDS, women living in rural and remote places, young women, the girl child, single mothers, women with albinism, older women, heterosexual women, women in sports, and women in creative industries. Additionally, when we refer to gender non-binary people, we include Pacifica identities that challenge gender norms and identities such as those of the fa'afafine in Samoa or Vakasa Leolewa in Fiji. We acknowledge that these identities are broad, that they have existed for centuries, and that prior to contact and colonization were respected and celebrated by indigenous people in the Pacific. Winaka. So maybe before we start, let me just introduce myself a little bit. So I'm not sure whether all of you saw the little write-up that went around earlier. As you can see, my name is Liliana Warid. I come from a background in the private sector. I've been in the finance sector for most of my career, for about 20 years, working for an international bank here in Fiji. I worked in Vanuatu for a little while through the same commercial bank before joining Asian Development Bank based in Sydney, looking after private sector development projects and some financial sector development projects in the Pacific. So I have two children. I have a 13-year-old young man, a 23-year-old young adult who I believe woman who is on the call, I believe. She is studying here in Fiji, doing her master's in psychology. I always have to say that, just, don't mind me. I'm a very proud mother. She's a lot more intelligent than her mother was at 23. So I have two children here with me in Fiji. And I have been back in Fiji since 2018. And I work as a consultant. And I work in the space of, I work with a lot of organizations. And I generally, well, in a nutshell, I work with them to improve business performance. So I specialize in process re-engineering, building reporting, and working with people really in the organizations to make sure that happens. Now, this work I do really is an overflow of what I'm passionate about, which is seeing people progress. And so I've done this for many years within my church, and more recently out in the community. So working primarily with the sex worker community, some of the unemployed, and some in the informal settlements. So it's been quite a learning journey for me. So some of this will come out as we progress. Lastly, there's one more thing I want to disclose. I have never moderated anything like this in my life. So remember, this is a talanoa, and so in talanoas, there's a lot of grace in talanoas for Pacific Islanders. So can we just all agree that, we're all coming with the same heart of wanting, from development and loving our Pacific Islanders and non-Pacific Islanders. So please forgive me if I say anything that's politically incorrect. Please know that I mean well. I don't want to offend anyone. And this moderator job, yeah, it's not as easy as I thought. So I've got like 3 different books in front of me and a phone. So just bear with me. I'm sure we'll all be fine. You're in good hands. You're in good hands. So anyway, we're here to talk about our topic today. We're here to really unpack this thought, right? So this is going to be a very easy session, really easy talanoa. And we're unpacking this thought, unpacking this question of how can we ensure that Pacific Islanders are not left behind as Pacific development organizations begin to change. So when I first heard this topic, I thought, fantastic, there is change happening in this space. As I said earlier, I had a small stint with Asian Development Bank. And quite honestly, I became very disillusioned with this whole development world. I had a very, very different view of what it would be like in there. Anyway, it really encouraged me that these conversations are happening. And, international NGOs, not only have to change in response to ensure that the voices of Pacific Islanders are front and center, but it's necessary in this day and age because we INGOs are dealing with, issues with funding. There's more scrutiny from governments, even from the public. And I feel like for us in the Pacific Islands, the more educated you get, I guess, the more Pacific Islanders that are becoming educated, they're living and working and studying overseas, we're coming back and we are feeling a lot more empowered, not only through that, but because of a lot of great work that has been done in the country through INGOs as well, giving us, I guess, permission that we might not have felt like we had to use our voice, particularly women. But we are now, what that means is that we are being a lot more outspoken and under a lot more scrutiny, I guess, from the public. When I talk about public, I'm talking that context specifically about Pacific Islanders. So we have to evolve, whether you're in the private sector or whether we are part of international NGOs or NGOs, wherever. We have to evolve to be relevant, right? And so for me, this is not a new thought. Personally, this is a new thought. This is what my whole work is about. This is what I live and breathe. Okay, there's always change that has to happen. And I found in my years, in about 20 years of me working in these spaces of change and re-engineering, is that sustainable change can only happen if people are involved in this process. So I've been trained in a methodology that looks at, the probability of processes failing and all of that kind of thing. And I learned the hard way that if people are not involved, it doesn't matter how good looking the process, the policy or program is, it will not work because it is only as good as the people that it is made for. And so I'm really thankful to be able to be part of this conversation and thinking of that in the context of the development world. And with me today to help unpack this and have a bit of a talanoa about it is the gorgeous, as you can see, Mary Nailatikau. Mbula Mary, thank you for making time for us today.
Thanks for having me, Liliana, and it's lovely to see everyone. Thank you for sharing space with us. I see some familiar names. It's wonderful to see you all. And for people who I don't know or I am yet to know, mbula vinaka to you all.
Thank you. Let me tell you a little bit about this brilliant woman. So she often says, when you hear about Mary, she often says that she's a storyteller. She is a storyteller. She's a great storyteller. So she's a storyteller, she's a development professional, and she has more than 15 years of experience in research, communications, and public diplomacy. She is from Fiji, so she's Fijian, and she's currently, because the big intelligent, brilliant brain that she is, she's currently a Fulbright scholar, and she's studying in the University of Minnesota, right? I got that right, yeah, Mary. Hubert Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Oh, that's a mouthful. After graduating with a bachelor's degree, she got a bachelor's degree in psychology and management and a master's degree in development studies. She spent several years working in media, the creative arts, civil society, and aid-funded development organizations. So her work and life experience have taught her to appreciate the value of a well-told story and its ability to connect people, changing their lives for the better. Man, we have so much in common, except for the Fulbright scholar part, small little difference there. So Mary, we're gonna have a really good conversation today. I hope you're looking forward to it.
Thank you. You're a great hype person. And I think, it's wonderful to also, pay homage to a lot of the people who are on this call as well, who've played a big role in that journey. I think, as we all nothing good or nothing worthwhile happens alone. And so, that's certainly something that I carry with me.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. So we're going to go straight into a few questions that I have for Mary, and we'll unpack this together. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. Otherwise, we will be taking questions at the end of the session. We'll probably go on for about 30 to 40 minutes. Yeah, and so then we'll take questions then. So Mary, the first thing I wanted to ask, just thinking about organizational change, right? And the processes, and just thinking about your experience in this space. Can you tell us a bit about, any changes you've seen or you've experienced, you've been a part of, and what has worked and what didn't work, but also if that experience impacted your perception of how Pacific organizations should engage with change processes at all?
Oh, well, thanks, Liliana. I won't speak over your, the scene setting that you've placed for us. And I think, when it comes to the question of if it's worth it, you really said it at the beginning, life is change, right? And change is a reality. So, we either change knowingly or change with as much wisdom as we can muster from and with one another, or life changes us. And I think this is timely too in terms of my own experience and the conversation that we had just before this. I've been in conversation recently with people who are close to me, who are in different countries, work outside of development, and also are on different sort of areas in terms of their careers, different income brackets. And, what really saddened me to hear them all, convey in recent weeks is, just this feeling of being deeply impacted by the organizational changes that are happening in their lives, to hear them convey feelings of being, trapped in the impossible choices. So, how can I be a single parent, working long hours of shift work and feeling terrible about myself, not being able to save $10 or $20, or, how can I navigate my studies as a first generation student at, a large institution and, being resigned to maybe having, dealing with student loans my whole life, or, how can, someone in a relatively higher income role, struggling with whether they want to, they do want to spend more time with their children, but they fear taking time off work because, of the worries that they might not be able to afford the education that they want, or, the different obligations that people have. So, we are in this ecosystem of change. And I think, the point I'm trying to make there is that, organizational change happens on the theoretical levels that we all discuss, but it also happens and lives in people's bodies, and in the families that we all have, the communities that we all come from. So, with that said, I think what makes development unique, or at least in the past few years that I've had the privilege of working in development, is, reflecting on my own experiences, is that development is an industry that's steeped in this notion of benevolence, and a lot of times we have to self-reflect on what that says about, about that self-image of ourselves, and a lot of privilege, like you and I, for example, Liliana, would have privileges that many others in different positions, in different places in their lives, Pacific Islanders may not necessarily have. And with development, wherever there is turmoil or need, or, their development is, right? So at best, we are partners or allies, as our favorite words, or at worst, development actors are seen as profiteers, so it's a big part of the spectrum that, that applies to many industries, many sectors, not just development. So when you asked about my personal experience, I've, experienced being part of organizational change as part of a bilateral donor, as part of an INGO. Guess which one? Probably wouldn't take too many guesses to guess right. An INGO looking to work differently in the region, and also contractor managed programs. So those are all different experiences. And looking back now, not just because the nature of the organizations are different, but also because of who I was as a person at the time, where I was in my life, like we all know, we're all going through change in life. So, in terms of some of the takeaways or, reflection points for me of that are, sort of those varied experiences, firstly is that it's personal. I think, like I said, it lives in our bodies, people we ascribe meaning to, we derive meaning from the organizations we are part of, we believe to an extent in their mission, whether it's our school, our community, our church, as you mentioned, Liliana. Same goes with our employer. And if you think about it, we spend almost more time at work than in many other places. And so, of course, over that time that sense of value and identity builds. And I certainly saw this come into play when experiencing organizational change. So about a decade ago, I worked for a donor in Fiji that was undergoing a merger, and this has happened across the world. It's happened in Canada, for instance. I think it was around about the same time, 2013 or 2014, when the Canada International Development Authority merged with their Foreign Affairs and Trade Department. So that merged. In Australia, of course, it happened when what was known as AusAid became merged with their Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. More recently during the pandemic in 2020, it happened in the UK with DFID, right? Merging with their FCO. So I remember seeing that in the news and saying, I don't know what that specific experience is, but it rang familiar to me. And so, a lot of people would read that as saying, okay, donor countries are definitely merging their aid more closely with their self-interest. So if your aid is in your left hand, your self-interest in your right, and the two hands occasionally clap, well, when they're merged, they're definitely, clasped together, if you look at it in that way. And when I experienced this as an employee of a donor organization, I was relatively early in my career. It wasn't my first job, but it was early days. And I don't remember the exact number of days, but it was within the same week. So I joined the organization on the Monday, and the merger was announced on the Wednesday. So it was a time of, a time of change. It was a difficult time. And particularly as I came to see in the weeks and months that passed, particularly a difficult time for people who had worked there and been there for much longer, whether they had been local staff with tremendous experience or staff from abroad who had been with the organization in various capacities over time. So, when people spend years with an organization, we internalize its mission, all its ups and downs, we're in it for the long haul. And so, when the rug is pulled out from under you, for instance, that's difficult. So it was only human that a lot of people reacted in a way that was kind of like mourning, and I think that happens across many organizations. There's a sense of mourning what your aspirations would have been for the organization you're part of, and, of farewelling often at, not of your own choice, what has been. I'm also deeply aware, that, it did present real worries, and repercussions for organizations like Oxfam Australia, who, receive, government funding, for instance, and, of course, the communities they serve. So I don't at all want to negate the real problems of who we are really, this support is intended to serve. So I acknowledge that and just, want to maintain that I'll only do my best to speak to my perspective, as, in terms of my position at the time. So, change is deeply felt. There's a sense of grief and loss when people see an organization they work for, part of their identity, their friendships, come to pass, right? And so, this makes internal communication so much more important, and we say that almost, kind of as a kind of for granted, but it's no small feat really. And, it's actively and persistently needed. I think, as you alluded to earlier, if people are not involved throughout the process, even if it might not have been, of their own volition in the beginning, it makes a difficult situation just that much more easier. It certainly doesn't undo the losses or take worries away, but it can help maintain, a sense of dignity for everyone. So, I think in organizations that captured that knew that, and were immediate and persistent with having staff be able to feel heard, at least, or to be able to explain actions as much as they possibly could, I think even if people walked away unsatisfied, they kept faith that genuine efforts were being made, So I think that was definitely important. And then secondly, as you and I discussed, and I think as everyone here can appreciate, nothing happens in a little experimental lab, right? It's not under a bell jar. There is rarely ever just one change happening, right? So, in terms of when I was a communicator with Oxfam as an INGO, it was an incredibly exciting time doing something differently. with Oxfam in the region. Of course, it had all, been a presence for a long time, but looking at ways that we could that we could work differently. And then against the backdrop of that change, then allegations of sexual misconduct in Haiti by Oxfam staff emerged. This was around in 2018. So, I was abroad at a regional media coordinators meeting at the time. It was as a side note, it was a wonderful opportunity to see other regional media coordinators who were all from their regions, whether it was Latin America or the Caribbean or the Middle East. It was wonderful to see that kind of representation happen, in an organization like that. And, it was the final days of us all returning home when this, sort of the repercussions of this incident unfurled. It caused a huge flurry for sure. And by the time we realized, we live in a siloed world, yes, but our world is also borderless when it comes to news and it comes to the various ways that we are all connected for good and ill. And so, the story was breaking, everywhere. Media queries were piling up, of course. Staff were understandably going through, difficult times, thinking about what the implications would be for the communities being served and for partnerships. But then on top of that change, there was also a beloved colleague in Oxfam in Fiji who passed away suddenly. So it was change upon grief. And I think, a realistic way to approach change is just to always remember that this isn't the only thing happening in people's lives. It's not always the only thing that's front of mind. And I've seen organizations appreciate that in different ways. Sometimes it's easy to think that organizations only want the productive part of you, right? Just bring that part of you to work and that's it. But, as we are all discovering, people are entire, we are entire human beings, right? Managing our own lives, dealing with our own governments as citizens in our own governments, right? Advocating for keeping our communities together, our families. So change is happening on multiple fronts. And, that certainly was brought to the fore in that particular instance, but I'm sure we can agree it happens everywhere. And then I think this thirdly and finally, my takeaway as a communicator is, the perception of change is not change, right? I think, an organization needs to ask itself honestly, just as we all, ask ourselves at, some point or other in life, do I want to be perceived differently or do I actually want to be different? And the payoff for the perception of change can be tempting. You might have seen this in your corporate experience, Liliana. We really want to get out there and show people that we are different or that we've, distanced ourselves from this, from a certain incident that we don't want to be a part of. Let's string some words together and, put a statement out there. But, what's harder and less glamorous is doing the actual internal work to make sure that your changes are sustainable, that they are happening, that you are pausing for long enough to ensure that you're not just being reactionary and causing, unnecessary harm. So, I think a lesson is while I won't advocate for dismissing anything outright, for me, I always pause when I see, changes happening with an external focus. If you're, mostly focused on looking differently, on the public perception, for instance, it might be a logo change, the new branding manual happens. And then, of course, the enforcement starts on all the partners. The signing is changed, all the, all the merchandise is changed. And I've experienced it across, a range of organizations that I've worked with. And, I think we really need to ask ourselves, it's better to do different than just to be perceived as being different, because whether or not we like it, people can see dissonance, and you will erode your own credibility when you haven't done that. So organizations that I saw do that well, Oxfam was certainly one of them, where there were no excuses, there was no defensiveness. very, at, as early as a stage as it could have been. I'm sure there will always be imperfections in hindsight and different things that could have been done differently. I certainly don't argue with that. But also, making sure that with words were policy changes or were changes made, were, actions taken to ensure that these changes were enforced, and having leadership at the highest level front up to, to acknowledge, to apologize, and to navigate the way through. Like I said, it's not a process that's perfect. It's not going to be the instant, way to remove all ills, but it can certainly make a difficult process a lot more easier, and to turn a difficult time into a teachable moment rather than perpetuating harm. And then just finally, Liliana, sorry, I won't drag this on too long, is that, my last piece of little hard-earned lessons is, don't flinch. Change is uncomfortable, and sometimes we deny ourselves the process of seeing change through by seeking comfort. I mean, I live here in Minnesota and Minneapolis on Dakota land. Just as an example, the institution that I study in is built on a legacy of dispossession, of the people, the custodians of this land. And there are, active community and student movements here calling for land back. And, this is the city where George Floyd was murdered, and too many others, of course, and that led to worldwide protests, and countless commitments were made across the globe for diversity and inclusion. Anyone know that term? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? The DEI industry that has been around for decades, but certainly was spurred on by, by those horrific events. And so, there was a wave of diversity and inclusion roles that were created. Corporations were put in the spotlight. People were hired as DEI advisors or officers. But now, years later, we're seeing a wave of exits, of DEI advisors from high-profile organizations, and it isn't going unnoticed. Another institution, I think it's Texas A&M University, for example, their president recently tendered her resignation after resistance against hiring a prominent thought leader in journalism because of their racial equity or racial justice background. And so, resistance is real. Regression is real, and often people are not just left behind; they are pushed aside. So, I think that's something that's worth acknowledging, that we are seeing organizations, societies even, cling to comfort and survival, right? So rather than the goal being the goal is the survival of the organization. So, I think it's important not to rob ourselves of that opportunity for growth, if we take that path.
Yes, thank you. Gosh, Mary, you've given us so much. I feel like we can just end the call right now and just think through what you've shared with us. And I think, like, we can just agree. We've already agreed, right? Like, we know that in Fiji, we know that in the Pacific Islands and outside, it happens. With us as we change. And I think one of the things that came out was just how we somehow have managed to. Is my internet okay? Jesh, can you still hear me? Okay, yes. We okay?
Yeah, we can hear you now. You went off for a bit.
Okay. So I was just saying, like, with change, we somehow along the way dehumanize change, which is why we kind of behave that way. And like you said, we are learning as we go. And I've been with organizations also that really do not place a lot of value on the importance of people in this whole process. It's kind of like, we are changing. This is a new process, so get in line. But like you said, it's like these are whole lives that are coming with children and, plans for the future. And so it can be really, really scary. And it also made me think about how going forward, it might be useful for us as organizations to build agile models. So it's easier to change, because now, like in this century, change is happening a lot faster than it used to, especially with technology. Things are just like, everything's gone upside down. And so I remember reading like about COVID, and someone was saying, COVID has actually advanced us by 10 years. And if you think of the Pacific Islands, we are like 20 years behind Matangai in the first place, pre-COVID. And so it's like everything just spins out of control. But before we move to the next question, there's something I just wanted to check your thinking on, because what I found in just walking alongside people, because I've been involved in a lot of, project managing changes and things like that. Because one thing I've said to some of the CEOs or the leadership teams I've worked with is said, I believe it's best that you do not say that there will be no job losses, because we don't know that. Like, we don't want anyone to lose their jobs, but we don't know that. And maybe it won't be in this change, but maybe it'll be in another change. But one of the things I have been able to do with some of the people in teams is to talk about how it is our responsibility to make sure we are marketable, or we have the skills to be able to up and move. And so I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on our responsibility as humans, as part of organizations that know that there is definitely going to be change somewhere down the line in relation specifically to the work environment? What do you think about us readying ourselves or being prepared for change? Do you think that's an important part of this whole change story?
Oh, yeah, I think you absolutely have a point there, Liliana. And in speaking about the types of advice that you give to leadership, for example, that mirrors a lot of what a lot of the discussions that I've been a part of as well. And this is a difficult time. People's livelihoods and dignity are on the line. Above all, tell the truth. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And those can come to agonizing decisions. But above all, I think people's expectations, people's belief in you, people's trust in you, it's precious. But especially at those times, it is absolutely invaluable, right? And it's our human reflex, right, to just tell people what they want to hear. But at the same time, I think exactly as the wonderful Alaniata says, honesty really is the best policy. And moving into the second part of the question that you asked, yes, I think it's something that we can often neglect as part of ourselves, as part of our personal and professional development. And organizations are different in the amount of space and the amount of support that they give for people to be able to develop themselves. And I think it's important to develop independently of your work as well. It might not necessarily be related to your work, but it can be something that fosters your creativity, your sense, or your desire for service, or all these different ways. We sometimes just lock it into the job description. If it's related to your job description, then yes. But otherwise, it's all these disparate parts of our lives. As Indigenous people, we know this. Everything is interconnected, and all these things we bring to the fullness of the way we do work. So, I think that's, an often neglected opportunity, Liliana, that's true. That is something that we can all take responsibility for. And at the same time, I think, it's on organizations to ensure that they are not standing in the way of, of people who are seeking to develop themselves. Because I think, as you can see, it's heartbreaking when it's only a very human thing to do, to attach yourself, to bind yourself so tightly to an organization or to a certain level within an organization. It's only human, but it's something that people can place a lot of value in. And I think taking those steps can help you be more robust, right? In that sense.
Yeah, and more resilient. Yeah, absolutely. Let's just move on. I wanted to ask, right? When Pacific INGOs changed, it's sometimes driven by notions of decolonizing their structures, right? Ways of working and partnering. However, these organizations are often led by non-Pacific Islanders and non-Indigenous. So that gets a bit tricky. And I always wondered, okay, so how is it that you understand this again? to be quite frank, it's difficult to wrap your head around, right? And, I like bless everyone that's working in this space, because I understand also that we come with the same heart, right? Wanting to develop and wanting to help people. But my question is around, so with this in mind, like how would they then, the non-Indigenous and non-Pacific Islanders, engage in these type of changes without being tokenistic? Or even worse than that, create more harm in the process, particularly for the Indigenous communities, Indigenous people, the local communities, women and girls, and gender non-binary people?
Well, I think, I can only reflect on, on touch points from my experience and from my perspective. I think as a Pacific Island person, Indigenous or non-Indigenous, we love language, right? Language is our thing, but also something that I've noticed is that it's starting to become more and more common now that within the Pacific, within different movements, words and terms can be co-opted, right? To say decolonizing, for instance, is one thing, but I think you might see it in the corporate world as well, Liliana, where people will take a term, right? Take a term and use it, but make it mean what they want it to mean, right? And they will dilute the change that an organization or that individuals are actually trying to fight for, trying to advocate for. So, I am always, like I said, not dismissive of them outright, but I'm always wary when I see, for example, Indigenous terms like talanoa or other non-Indigenous terms used as well. And I think, one of those things there is, like I alluded to earlier, is making sure that the actions are matching the words. I think something I recall from one of the early discussions about, when we were at, the COP that the climate talks that Fiji co-hosted in Germany, was hearing Rachel Nicole, who was regional director of Oxfam at the time, really unpicking the concept of talanoa, and saying it's not just a conversation. Who is at the conversation is important. How people are included in the conversation, the space from which they come into the conversation, of being one that is welcoming, that, that is open to them. Those things matter too, rather than, as again, one of our commenters stated, then using a term and not quite demonstrating the principle of the term. So there's that, the co-opting. And then secondly, I remember I coined a term. I'm sure I'm not the first to use it at some point in my journey, called oppressive inclusion, right? As someone somewhere in a position of power will decide that they would like to meet with or convene a group of people, obviously, for Indigenous people, local communities, women and girls, as you mentioned, gender non-binary people, they will want this to happen at a time or a place and in a mode that is decided by them, right? They will usually want it to happen yesterday. And it will either happen in ignorance of, or directly in contradiction to existing organizing meetings, clashing sometimes even, and the staff of such an organization, it's usually the local staff, right, who have cultivated relationships with communities, who have to be on the end of making it happen, right? And of course the matter is always urgent. It's always really urgent, right? And people feel compelled, are strongly incentivized to inconvenience themselves, or to really, put themselves under, great tension to be able to make these opportunities, or what they see as opportunities. And so, for me, I think, someone mentioned this earlier, it might have been in the comments as well, is, sometimes what may seem like chaos or slowness or a lack of processes to you might just be your own lack of understanding that organizing mechanisms exist, right? And sometimes if these organizing mechanisms are fragile, it's because there are so many burdens placed on them by not just you, but by other organizations, other development organizations, right? we're all on our own journeys of trying to know ourselves, trying to, remember and reclaim our, what our, how we want to live our values. And so, sometimes when people have this narrow, shallow understanding of context, and this happens, across the world, we only rely on a narrow field of vision. So often it's the same advocates that get leaned on heavily, or, we always, unbeknownst to us, will gravitate towards who we are more comfortable with, or who is less combative, I guess, to us. And so, I would, encourage organizations to be, watchers, learners, and listeners. There have been Pacific elders and scholars who have been, reflecting on this for a long time. Simeone Sevunrendre is one of them. There are many as well who, even if you might miss out on what you think is an opportunity, doing it the right way is better than causing harm. And I think just finally, Liliana, on other ways is I would love to hear from from people who are with us today as well, is if you see this as a challenge, or with, and it's certainly something that I've perceived. I think there's a promising but sadly neglected opportunity to build on existing solidarity between Indigenous peoples. And so often the face of development or the face of an INGO is a white face, right? Or, and it's easy to forget sometimes, tragically, and unfortunately, and to our great detriment, to forget that there are Indigenous members of our regional and global family in countries like the United States, like Australia, like New Zealand. So I would love to see more of, more INGOs and development organizations, commit to this, whether it's, it's recognizing and valuing the Indigenous wisdom within their own ranks, to see them in senior ranks in decision-making as well. Just as I come from a land of, of custodians, so too does this land I'm living on here in the United States. It has its own custodians as well. And, so does Australia, so does New Zealand. So, I'm wondering how we can have on the development front line, greater recognition and representation of our Indigenous family members across the world. And so, sometimes that gets relegated to the realm, just as valuable realm of culture and artistic expression, right? And I would never take away from that, but we all, and we also have broader opportunities to be in community with one another. So, that's just something I'm flagging, and, I would love to hear if anyone feels the same way as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mary. We were talking about, you talked about how we're going into communities, and we have, some of the practicalities or the logistical things that happen when, like, oh, so-and-so is here and we need to reorganize this and get everyone from the community to do this. And, when you're talking earlier, also when we talk about decolonization, we also had a bit of conversation about from our end as Pacific Islanders, because we are also working through this process of decolonizing our own mindsets. We have a view of the Westerners a certain way, even in the corporate world, we see it. And so when we reorganize, like, we know that, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to get something from this white person who's coming into our community. And again, like, without realizing, is keeping us in that mindset, because that is kind of how we see the white people, that they're going to come and help us out of this space. And I think I've been talking to the community a lot about us taking responsibility ourselves, which is, again, this process of decolonizing our own minds, and when I look within the community and all of these social issues, a lot of people write to me and say, oh, why don't you approach, this NGO or that NGO? And I'm like, how about we just help each other? Because this is our community. And that is the kind of community we are. We've kind of moved away from who we are at the same time. So I'm really been engaged in a lot of conversations recently on just, we also as Indigenous have huge responsibilities here, and I believe in a way will help INGOs, because a lot of the time they're doing the best they can with what they have, the way they know how. So we also have a responsibility to use our voices in those spaces, right? You know what, it's like 10 minutes to 5 for us to finish. Is moderator really going to get fired for not controlling this conversation? I'm just enjoying it so much. But I thought so we could give a little bit of time for questions. I thought we'd just end like this. I'm really big on practical things. So I was hoping that maybe you and I could just maybe leave with those on the call who might be in NGOs or other organizations, some practical things, and like you can go away and think, maybe I can do this, just based on the conversations we've had so far. What is something that you'd like to leave behind, one or two things that might be useful for the right now?
Oh, definitely. I think, Liliana, I'm just as much a fan of mutual aid as you are. I think that's certainly not a concept that's new to an organization like Oxfam, and something that we see popping up spontaneously, right? Whether it was during the COVID outbreak when youth groups across the Pacific diaspora started to mobilize virtually to raise funds for communities back home. And I have a story of when it was post-Cyclone Winston, when I worked, for the donor organization I worked for at a time, and we flew in to a village, of course, literal helicopter flying in, right? I definitely see the irony. We flew into this village, and these two joyful, wonderful, women from the village, they would have been in their 60s, were happily greeting us. They were from Australia, had lived abroad for 2 decades, and had already made their way from Australia back home, and were waiting for their container to arrive. They had packed the container full of things, and sent it to their village, and off they went, ahead of it to await its arrival, right? And you could see I don't want to overuse the word resilience, but you could see the ability of communities to bounce back when they had these links strong and and nurtured and and active in response to what was needed. They knew the 2x4s that were needed, and the corrugated iron, and all those things that were in the container. So I think that's something that I carry with me, and I know that so many of us are in solidarity with. And I think one practical thing from my own experience and observations is, the best thing that one of the things that we can do for development is to own our interconnectedness. I think so many times organizations might seem to, or sometimes we take that as the norm, that we only bring this part of ourselves to work. But I think there are all these aspects of our lives that have value as well, as we know in our ways of living. And so sometimes something that I used to find myself conflicted about was, I want to undertake this voluntary work with this organization, or be on this committee, or help out in this way. And I would feel a sense of guilt for kind of not being as loyal to the development organization that I was working with. It seems preposterous now, but that was the way that I thought at the time. And then I discovered there were, processes in place where I could, note my role, my conflict of interest, have that registered with my employer, and be able to do these things because I really wanted to. And so, I think opportunities to show up for our community are there. And so for people in development organizations, I encourage you, seek out these processes if they exist, demand them if you may, if they do not exist. And for development organizations, to be mindful of this type of work that's complementary and meaningful to us as people of our communities, right? It shouldn't be seen as extracurricular or under the radar. We shouldn't be made to feel guilty for wanting to be active citizens, active members of our community. So that's certainly something that I would encourage, something practical that organizations can consider.
Awesome. That is one of the, I'm trying to be very diplomatic when I'm listening to your language, and I can't think of any other word but ridiculous right now. To say it's so ridiculous to me that those working in NGOs or INGOs would not be allowed to freely go and do that sort of, go into those spaces and do, like, why on earth would you have to apply? Like, I don't know, obviously there's some kind of reason.
There are, these issues of, of neutrality and, making sure that we, I think at the time it depended on the, the mood of the government or the relationship between, our organization and the government at the time. And, I acknowledge that, yes, people do, can and do, take advantage of roles that they have in multiple organizations. So, I can see at a baseline, the need for some of these things. But yes, and I think now, being older and wiser, back then I was, still green and a little naive, now I think that, I want to be of service. We all are of service in our different ways. So I think if those processes were encouraged and visible and there, it prevents it prevents people from feeling like they have to hide things.
Yes. And I because being more involved in the community of recent times, I've realized it's just really brought a big awareness of my own privilege. And, you and I, yes, we're Indigenous Fijian women, but we are privileged. And so we don't even realize it sometimes until we go into these spaces. And so those of us who are working in INGOs, not everybody has had that experience. And for some of the, I guess, the seniors of INGOs who are here, who are non-Indigenous or not Pacific Islander, I think it's important to note that it doesn't mean that every Pacific Islander is, how do I say this, is completely knowledgeable of everything that's happening on the ground. So I think that's important for us to note. And like, because if I went into any other space, I would just think Indigenous would know everything. And so in my head, I would think, okay, I should make it mandatory for people, not only the locals, can I just say, but also those non-Pacific Islanders. Because one thing I've noticed is that when we have non-Pacific Islanders coming into these NGOs, you live in their own bubble, right? There's the whole expat community that are living separately to every, that's just the way it is. I'm not criticizing the way it is, but that's the way it is. And if we compare to the colonizers back in the day, the British came and lived amongst the people, so they were the district officers and the district commissioners, and so they were, they had a different level of understanding, and so now we come with experts who are really the ones that have, the papers, the masters or the PhDs. So I think that's a really important practical thing to consider, because it informs the work you do, and it's not out of your time, but it makes you better at the work you're doing, because we can only explain so much, but sometimes we don't know what you need to know because we assume that you might know some things. So it's not until you get in there. And I've got a good friend who works at an NGO in Brisbane, and she comes down often, and we go into these spaces and she's asking all sorts of questions. And why do we do this? And but she would not have known if she would just, she goes into the villages, and a lot do that. But I think it should become mandatory, really, if you're working in a development space. It makes sense. I just, I have to say, I really love the way that you're describing all of this in your diplomatic language. I think maybe if I'm invited back to do another moderator job, I'll get better at this language. But right now, you just have to bear with me.
Well, thank you for feel comfortable. And thanks to everyone. So kind.
So I don't have the scholarship, guys. So maybe later, a few years, then I'll sound a little bit better like Mary. But anyway, this has been a great conversation. I want to just see whether there's any questions while we have Mary on the call, or if anyone has anything that you'd like me to answer. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to look here for questions. So Jesh, okay, they're not in my messengers. Let me, okay. Everyone's saying thank you. Does that mean you're going, or are you going to ask a question? Okay, wait, there's a direct message. Hold on, everyone. I've got this. Yeah, I don't know where's the direct message. Give me a minute, guys, please. Bear with me. Yeah, Jesh, I don't know where it is. Could you just maybe share with us the questions that you have, if you have any?
No worries, Liliana. I don't see any questions on the chat as of yet.
Okay, wonderful.
It's down to your facilitation, Liliana.
Oh, thanks, everyone. Thank you. Well, if we have nothing else, okay, I'm just sorry, I'm getting a bit distracted reading these comments. Honestly, you need like 2 brains doing this kind of moderation.
To see you, and Shadiana as well. Wonderful to see you. Good friends. And thank you for the ones as well.
Nice. Well, if there are no questions, thank you very much, everyone, for making the time and joining us at this talanoa. Thank you for your grace with your moderator. Thank you so much, Mary. Like, you have just given us, okay, Bluff, there's one question here. Okay, we have time for one question, so let's do this question. I'm not even going to try and pronounce this name, Mr. Raman. So his question is, how can academia research organizations explore synergies with you? Okay, this is a personal question for you, friend.
I would just use this opportunity to uplift other Pacific academics that I know of, because I know that there are many. I believe there is a gentleman by the name of Alfred Torra who is working with Simeone Sebunrenre to look at indigenous perspectives or frameworks for what a healthy workplace looks like. Yes. What in the sort of indigenous values or frames or lenses can be for a productive and a healthy workplace. I think there's some promising work that's happening there, and of course I would never assume that other work isn't out there as well. But I think that there is thinking around this. There's there always has been, and I think people are starting to mobilize around. Fine, we live in this great organizational world. How can we use or value and celebrate from our indigenous ways of being?
Yes, yeah, that's great. Those are perfect referrals. Thanks so much, Mary. Okay, so looks like we do not have any more questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Raman. And Mary, thank you again for your time. Thank you, everybody, for making time, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for your grace again, and I hope you all learned something new or something that we can take away and just ponder upon. And please continue the conversations in your own spaces. I always say, though, that when we're conversing, it'd be great to put some into action. So, side note here, if you haven't or not, if you're on social media, please message me if you're interested in getting into the community, to having a look around. I'll be happy to connect you to any and just to get a bit more involved if you're keen to. Other than that, you all have a great evening, and we will see you again at the next talanoa. Vinak.
Thank you all.